Welcome to the Charleston CFO Council. This organization was co-founded in 2015 by Robert Bendetti and Mark Carmichael in order to provide a networking and educational forum for senior financial executives to share best practices, to discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their job.
Well, Randy, I'm going to introduce you in just a second. But Beth, I wanted to kick off to you for 30 seconds. Thank you for being our sponsor this morning. You want to say a little something?
Sure. I'm sorry I'm not buying everyone breakfast this morning. I so wish that we were, just for the purposes of getting together. So thank you. So Robert, Randy, and I all work for Lifecycle Engineering. And Lifecycle Engineering is Lifecycle Engineering is a services and consulting firm. We're focused on improving reliability and asset management. We really help clients manage their risk, improve their operating performance, and engage with their employees in a better way. So we offer services, consulting, and training related to those topics.
I think what the key takeaway there, Beth, is that I have a real job. There's a lot of people that think that the CFO Council is what I do for a living, and so it isn't. Guys, I have an actual job, and I get to work with Beth. I'm very lucky, and Randy. And Beth, I'm going to mute you. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Randy, I'm going to keep you unmuted for a second. In about 60 seconds, I'm going to introduce you, okay?
Great.
But let me introduce the CFO Council. The CFO Council, we got 2 chapters right now in Charleston, and the upstate members from both are on this call. It's an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives and the resource companies that we partner with. The resource companies make a contribution to be members every year, and then we give that money away to the Educational Foundation for Women in Accounting. This year, we gave $25,000 to them, and then the EFWA, they give away scholarships, and they do mentoring to women pursuing undergrad, grad, and PhDs in accounting. And there's some folks on this call right now who were on the scholarship committee for that group. So thank you all very much for those folks that are volunteering in that way. Randy Heisler, how are you doing, sir?
Good.
So one thing I didn't say before we started, I didn't tell you this, and I don't think Beth shared, is that I don't read bios. I just find stuff on the internet about you, and then I share that with everyone before you start talking.
Okay, I'm leaving now.
And first of all, this looks a lot like a YouTube series between one fern. So I appreciate you putting together the fern. And let's just start with an easy question. Who is your favorite CFO?
Oh, there's no question. I can't remember his name. I think it starts with the letter R. Oh, Robert. Robert is, yes.
Good answer. And my favorite VP is Randy Heisler, is the Vice President at Lifecycle Engineering. Like Beth said, we're a consulting firm. Before that, Randy, you were an executive at Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel Corporation. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
Are you a member of, it sounds like a super exciting association called the Association of Iron and Steel?
That's correct. It's at least 7,000 to 8,000 strong.
That must be a wild and crazy group. Congratulations. Yeah. Were you born in Ohio?
I was. Sorry, South Carolinians. Yes, I am from Ohio.
Did you live in West Virginia?
Yeah, actually, well, about half of my adult life, 23 years in West Virginia, raised our children there.
Steelers fan?
Big time, hoping for the season to start.
And I can't remember the wide receiver, number 86, Hines Ward. Are you a Hines Ward fan?
Oh gosh, yes. My wife more than me. She still has his old jersey, so big fans.
Have you met humorist and journalist Mo Rocca?
I have met Mo.
Yes.
I accosted him in a restaurant in Virginia, and his mother and grandmother were there with him, and they kindly quickly jumped up to ask me if I wanted a photo with him, and I said sure. And I told him I didn't want to bother him because this probably happens a lot. He goes, not enough. He was great.
Randy's a superstar, so I'm excited to have you here, and thank you for doing this. And it is timely. You know, the idea of business continuity. I Googled this, creating systems of prevention and recovery to deal with potential threats, and identifying those risks that could impact core business functions. Wow, that's timely, Randy. So thanks for talking to us about it.
There we go. Okay. Risk-based business continuity plans. What we'll try to cover is right off the bat, everyone's living it right now, some learnings from COVID-19. We'll talk about some other risks that are out there that maybe we're not thinking of. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. We'll talk about some standards, okay, that are out there for guidance. Some of you may be familiar with those. Maybe there'll be something new for some of you. We'll touch on those briefly. We'll talk probably quite a bit throughout about why plans fall short, because maybe we're not thinking about all the risks that are out there in front of us day to day. We're definitely going to cover operational risks. Like Beth said, we do a lot of work with organizations, and certainly a lot of it is manufacturing. We do facilities, we do tons of things with different types of organizations. So I think for those that maybe aren't the producers of physical products, try to think of it, some of this in a asset perspective. What are your assets, and how might you be looking at those risks? And then finally, we'll spend a short period of time at the end on how to develop a good risk-based business continuity plan. So let's first start with some history, okay? Bad things have happened, and when I started to get ready for this, it was kind of interesting to look back as to all the things that have happened to companies and the world over the last few years. And this goes back to, the Dow chemical leak back in 1984. That is very significant in Bhopal, India, killed 3,700 people. They claim 16,000 were killed, so pretty significant. The chemical leak that was just awful for that company, if you can imagine, okay, if that happened to you. Next slide, Robert. Everyone remembers this one, September 11th, 2001. Seems like yesterday, but that was 19 years ago now. The 3,000 people killed. Al-Qaeda was the culprit. 25,000 people were injured. There's still people today that are suffering from that. And I hope, I think we were all affected by 9/11. Everything changed, especially for those that travel in the airports and so on. Nothing has been the same since then. Has it directly affected anyone in the group? Or did it directly affect anyone at the time?
Yeah, I'm sure everyone has been affected. I can't believe it's been 20 years, Randy. That's it seems like it's been 5.
Oh, I know, it's incredible. Go ahead to the next one, Robert. The BP Deepwater Horizon. I don't know if you've all watched that movie, but it is well worth the watch to see just how bad things can get when an organization doesn't do the right things. And I'll touch a little deeper on that later, but 11 people were killed on the rig itself. We do a lot of oil rig work at Lifecycle Engineering, and they are an amazing piece of machinery, okay, that drills down to get oil. But I'll talk a little later about some of the causes of that. But it cost BP $61.6 billion, right? And that was a bad day for BP, a bad day for the people around the Gulf of Mexico. And I think we all remember it, once again, almost like it was yesterday. I think it was just horrible. Some of those effects from that are still out there, especially in that part of the world. So just a horrible thing. But the movie is very accurate if you've not watched it, and I encourage you to watch it, especially when you talk about risks or think about risks to your organization. Next one, Robert. Japan tsunami, March 11, 2011. once again, it seems like yesterday that I don't think any of us, I certainly don't remember actually, seeing something of that magnitude. And of course, in our world today, the videos and things that came back from there was just incredible. The total damage of $360 billion. Okay, thank goodness. Nothing that severe, at least I don't think that severe, has happened to us here in the U.S. Next one, Robert. Hurricane Harvey, August 17th, 2017. Fatalities 39, or 68 total, indirect 39, total 68. Damage 125 billion. Costliest tropical cyclone on record. It was amazing because it was so huge. It affected Texas, Louisiana, Belize, Nicaragua, Suriname. Just incredible. The devastation from something like that. So you're starting to get the picture, okay, that bad things happen unexpectedly. Next slide, Robert. This one, PG&E, and this one's kind of interesting for me because I had a meeting out there with these folks, and they were looking at reliability at the time. And of course, it was a few years prior to this wildfire that occurred. But gosh, at the end of the day, it's cost them $25.5 billion. They obviously didn't do enough around reliability, and I'm going to touch quite a bit on that later, I think for good reason. But the CEO said basically, our equipment started that fire. They admitted to it, and apologized to all the victims. And I think, that one's, recent enough that we remember. I mean, it just seemed like the fire went on and on and on. And it was basically an equipment failure that caused it. Next slide. Well, now we're at the present. I think certainly all of us, I don't think there is a single soul in this world that's not affected by COVID-19. Now, you'll notice these numbers are from June 30th. They're old in these days of COVID-19, and the cases and the deaths are much greater today because of it. And it's just, I think it's something that none of us ever expected. And the thing I find most interesting is it's like, many things happen in 100-year cycles. And when you think about the Spanish flu in 1918, okay, roughly 100 years later, here we are with COVID-19. So just incredible. And what I guess the positive side, I'm sure that everybody hears about, is we're going to get through this. They got through, okay, the Spanish flu in 1918, right? The world did recover. So I think better days are ahead, but let's go into a bit of some of the learnings, and I hope some of you can share some of the learnings from COVID-19. Next slide, Robert. Before I get there, and this is from the BBC, that many economies are expected to enter recession this year, and you can see the list there is large, and I think we're hopeful that that doesn't happen, but I think we all know we're in a bit of a serious situation there in terms of the financial situation due to COVID-19. Next one. There we go. So, like I said, bad things can happen unexpectedly. And my whole presentation is really about trying to prepare for something that we're not expecting to happen, okay, but could happen. I think that's the way we want to frame it. One of the things I think the learnings that I saw in some folks in the business world, and some folks I know that run their own companies, applying for that government assistance needed to be done as quickly as possible. And if you didn't scramble, you didn't get the money. And I think that's a learning going forward. You cannot wait a second, okay, to try to get any assistance you might need to help keep your business going.
One of the things that that I think is important to think about when you're talking about business continuity is also just changes in the marketplace. There's some things that are external forces and dramatic, like the slides that were earlier presented, but some things are just competition in the marketplace. And that a process of planning, a process for analyzing the principles of business continuity will also pick up many of the things that are mentioned in Good to Great. And common themes around lack of innovation will drive problems, also complacency, assuming that your competitors are never changing, your customers are never changing. Those are also significant risks. And then also your supply chain. One of the questions from the group was around their vendors and customers. And it's very true that the risks aren't just within your own company and maybe your customers or the natural environment around you, but it's also just your supply chain. And I think we've probably all been affected by massive changes from a key supplier. And certainly, if you didn't have old stories, you have some new stories now. And the supplies occur across 5 dimensions, like the key risk areas where you're going to have potential problems, or you may be experiencing potential problems right now in this COVID environment, are these up here. Either, and I'm not going to read them all, but I pull out specifically financial resiliency for this group that I know for lifecycle engineering, we have very key partners. And whereas I spend a lot of time analyzing my financial resiliency and making sure that I have the cash required to continue business, I hadn't had the time to really think about my key suppliers and how resilient they are and how important not only their financial stewardship is, but also decisions that I make on vendor terms and payment terms have on my key suppliers. So it's an example of something that should be looked at when you're thinking about business continuity and you're testing the system. Maybe you're shocking the system and doing analysis of the risk to your business. Financial resiliency is going to be one, but it's not just of your company, it's of your suppliers. And that and realize that things aren't static. You have the ability to support that customer during, if nothing else, just payment terms. And there might be, you might have a supplier right now that's going through harder times than you realize, and they're calling accounts receivable maybe more than you know, because the manager's not communicating that to you. And it might be a time for a little bit of flexibility or some grace around payment.
All right. Yeah, there's a couple standards out there. The National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA 1600, which is a U.S. standard. Some of you may be familiar with it. Defines the the elements, the essential elements that one needs to build a business continuity plan. It's got the planning, implementation, assessment, which is important to assess your plans and maintenance programs for prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. ISO 22301, an international standard. Very similar. Probably the only bad thing about these two, and actually you can use them in conjunction with one another, but the bad thing is that they are linked and they are comprehensive, to say the least. But a huge help. And if you're not familiar with them, they just ISO is known for standards, and we in our world live by many ISO standards in the work that we do. The good thing about them is they are very comprehensive, so they can help if needed. And hopefully some of you are already familiar with that. But business continuity, there is help out there. Next slide, Robert.
Randy, I'm going to hit you up with a couple questions if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
One was from earlier on, is what caused the spill, that oil spill that you mentioned?
I'm gonna make you hold that question, Robert, because I'm going to tell you exactly what caused it here in a few more slides.
And then another question was around how do you prepare for something that probably won't happen when time's so limited? I barely have time to plan for what is definitely going to happen.
Well, it's like a lot of things that we do is what we always recommend is building a cross-functional team, and to have people work on this in a part-time fashion. I kind of equate it to innovation teams. If your companies have innovation teams, is that they don't consume your organization, but they meet regularly, right, to work on innovation. And for these business continuity plans, has to be done the same way. No one has the time or the resources to say we're going to dedicate people in the organization to this. I don't think it requires that, but it does take let's call it an ongoing effort over time. Does that help, Robert?
Yeah. And then last question I'll ask at this pause is, one of the slides mentioned suppliers and customers, and what's the best way to find out if your suppliers, like your key suppliers, have a business continuity plan? And is there a best practices in asking for an update?
I don't know if there's a best practice for asking for that, but I'm a big believer in saying that it's an easy answer, Robert. Ask them. Okay, just point blank, ask them what they have, and ask for a copy of it. See what you can get, right? That it gives you some proof that they've done some work around that, because it's crucial to your business, right? Whether it's a supplier that you may get materials from, or a customer that's buying from you. I've got a story here later that I think will hit home on that, but I think it's very simple. Don't be afraid to ask. I came from a world in the steel industry that, number one, if anything went wrong, blame the vendor. Okay. If you need something, ask the vendor. If you want to check on, do they have something in place? There is nothing wrong with asking. What you might do actually is be doing them a favor, because if they haven't done anything, then they might do something, right? And you can actually, in some cases, let's say, at least from your suppliers, is demanded that they put something in place. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I think you just simply, I hate to use the word demand, but I think it's that important.
Great, thank you.
So why do plans fall short? They fall short for a number of reasons. A lot of folks say, well, we've got insurance for that. Well, insurance should be the last line of defense. You know what insurance is? It's reacting, right? Hey, something happened. Oh, now I have insurance, and that's going to take care of it. That required almost no planning except for getting insurance. And there's many things that happen to organizations go well beyond what the insurance is going to cover. Another thing is not identifying which assets are critical to the business. You can't imagine how many companies we go in to help and say, hey, have you determined asset criticality? And their answer is too often no. Well, we know what's critical. Well, do they? Oftentimes not. They tend to rely on, hey, here was the biggest thing that happened to us lately. So that's our most critical asset, which is often not the case. We find that it's really about recurrence of issues, not one big issue, if that makes sense. So things that just keep repeatedly happening, sometimes in a small way, end up being putting greater risk to the company than something that happens once in a while, but yet was big. So not identifying those critical assets is important. Not assessing upstream and downstream business risks. I think that's what Robert covered there nicely on the previous slide. It's really taking into consideration everything. I try to use the term be proactive. Start thinking about the things that you may not typically think about, both upstream and downstream. And another thing that happens is an undefined recovery time. If something bad happens, how long is it going to take to recover from it? Because that can be huge. Can our business survive, or asking the question, how long can our business survive if this happens, right? And I think there's been a lot of that with COVID-19. People are finding out, gosh, how long can I, restaurant owners are saying, Well, just how long can I go without any business? How long can I go with outdoor dining? How long can I go with just 50% indoor dining and outdoor dining? How long can I go with, just having pickup, whatever it might be? And they're asking those serious questions now. But I think, unfortunately, for some, it's reactive. It's reacting to it and not having put some plans in place prior to it. So it's understanding that's very important. And just the bottom line, they fall short because they were not recognizing all the risks. Next slide, Robert. That's my preaching. I'm done preaching on that, but it's so important. Look below the surface to identify risks. Titanic, didn't sink because of what they saw. It sank because of what they didn't see. Next slide. So, what other risks to business continuity exist? These are a few, and I know the group, and we'll take a pause here in a second, Robert, as to maybe some other risks that you all are thinking about that aren't part of the risks we've already talked about. So, operational issues, once again, whether it's a manufacturing organization or just how you operate your business, is reliability. You have risks around reliability of those processes, of anything and everything you do. Do you have a reliability practice or reliable practices in place? All right. The quality, especially if you're, whatever you might be producing as an end product, is the quality there, and is that a risk to your business? Like I can tell you, I was at a meeting with an executive from a pharmaceutical company. The whole room was a room full of, I don't know, 200 people. And the executive stood up there and expressed to the organization how critical the reliability of their operation was. And I'd never heard anybody say this before. You know what he said to the group? If we don't get this right, oh, by the way, they were a vaccine producer. If we don't get this right, people die. And you could hear a pin drop. So depending on your business, reliability, quality, and of course, safety. Safety is always number one, but companies can be extremely hurt by having safety issues or having a fatality, right? I think we all know that. So those are risks to the business that we have to think about. And just poorly planned capital spending. I mean, believe it or not, companies we see make mistakes because, well, we don't want to spend the money right now. We want to defer that, okay? We want the cheapest. Let's go out for bid, like the folks that went to the moon. If you remember the comment, I think in Apollo 13 was, hey, we're sitting on top of a rocket that was built by the lowest bidder. That's scary stuff, right? So, Robert, I don't know, is there any other questions pop in about, or not questions really, but other risks that we haven't touched on already?
Yeah, I got some comments, several. I'll put them into some umbrellas: financial, legal, HR, regulatory, compliance.
Huge. The last one is huge, right? And in some of that historical slides that I showed, that those were the downstream situation, right? From chemical spills, oil spills. You talk about regulatory issues from years to come. It's huge, and trying to be proactive around how we prevent that from happening is pretty significant.
Here's another one, Randy, that's I hadn't even thought of: reputational.
Well, I know in our business it's big, right?
Yeah, huge.
Okay, so why is operational reliability important? Now, this is certainly equipment related, but what this is related to was the answer to your question, Robert, which is on the Deepwater Horizon, the BP oil rig. Simply what caused that whole thing was something, you may remember this term, it was the blowout preventer. Many things went wrong, and if anybody has seen that movie, it really lays out what went wrong. I won't go into great detail, but there was an organizational culture issue that we're gonna drill for oil at all costs. We're gonna skip testing. We're going to skip quality checks. And it was we're gonna skip. And the result of that was a blowout preventer failure. Seems so insignificant, in this huge oil rig, that this one component, now it's not a super small component if you've ever actually seen one, but it's a critical component. And what it basically does is stops the gas and oil from coming up where it shouldn't. And if there's any explosion or any type of combustion, it stops that dead. So that's what happened there. And it was organizational, it was equipment, it was culture, it was many things. So bad things can happen. Next, Robert. That answer your question, Robert?
Yes, thank you.
So with that in mind, and this, I want some of you folks that maybe aren't manufacturing widgets to just think about this from the assets that you have. I'm going to talk about the risks to your operation that start all the way back on the left-hand side with design. Go to the next slide, Robert. How we design our assets for reliability is very important. Putting specific processes in place, having a disciplined method to understand the lowest life cycle cost. What that really means is what's it going to cost me over the life of that particular asset? And if I design it poorly, at the end of the day, it's going to cost me more. So a lot of thought needs to go into looking at what do I need to buy? And you'll do that when you buy your car or anything else. You say, hey, I want something that's going to be reliable. I don't want to break down on the side of the road. But if I buy the really cheap car, I'm putting myself at a higher risk than I am if I buy something that's been touted as having a greater reliability and at the end of the day, a lower life cycle cost. If you buy a washer and dryer, that yellow tag on the side says, here's what it's going to cost to run this from an energy perspective. Here's expected life, things like that. That's a good example of designing for reliability. But having performance targets, what do you want this asset to do over its life? Address how you're going to maintain it, and perform post-installation reviews. Did we get this thing installed correctly? Is it doing the function properly that we want? And tap into your people, because they know. So many of the folks we deal with say, well, if they would have asked me, I'd have said use this instead of that. And sometimes procurement folks are trying to help us by getting us the cheapest thing, but not always the best. And use failure mode effects analysis. I'll talk a little bit later about that in the principles of that design. Next slide, Robert. The next important piece around the risk to us is what we buy and how we store it. If I buy, it kind of goes back to the design a little bit. If I buy the cheapest and then I also don't store it properly, when I go to use it, I don't have it. Next slide, Robert. In ensuring the critical parts are on hand, I'll share a quick story from a very large aluminum manufacturer that produces the canning stock for roughly 50% of the cans that are made in the US. And I'll give you the short story is that they had I think it was a 40,000 horsepower motor that started having some issues. So they did have a spare. They put the spare in place, which was a big deal to change this large motor anyway. It wasn't just a half-hour job. They put the spare motor in place, and the production was already being hindered because of that. And then when they put the spare motor in place, it ran for about 2 days and quit. Now they were in a situation where they had no motor. Now, I'm not going to go into all the root cause, okay, but the spare motor had not been repaired properly. They had not done the standards properly that should have been in place, the quality reviews, the tests, so on and so on and so on. They were shut down for 60 days. Their customers came to them and said, this cannot happen, or we'll find someone else to get our product from. So it was, in a sense, not just, they had the critical part on hand, but there were many other things with it that they'd not done. So just an example, but for every asset, it's, we need to ask ourselves, what's failing most often, or what are we having the most problems with most of the time? That can help us point towards looking at what we have, making sure that we have those things in adequate quantity, and how are we storing them? Should they be in a climate controlled environment, and so on, right? Do we count? Do we do cycle counting regularly, right? And balancing the risk, like I mentioned earlier, the loss versus the cost of capital, right? And you financial folks, I know you've got that right in a sock. Next one, Robert.
Yeah, just a story, and I know this person, so I can share part of the story, but they work at a food manufacturing company, is fully automated, and a belt broke and stopped shipments for a day. Just one belt, because everything was funneling through one area. The belt broke and it couldn't load, package, and ship for a day because of one $50 part.
Crazy stuff, huh? So once again, being proactive and looking at those risks. When we do put new assets in place, have we installed them properly? Are we starting them up properly, and so on? Next slide, Robert. Precision there is absolutely key. Many times when people put in new assets, or they build new buildings, or whatever it might be, there's a rush to get it done. There's a project plan that says on time and under budget. And many times that precision piece is lost. So it puts risk into the business. Making sure that things are aligned, balanced when we're talking about equipment, components, whatever stresses there might be, all those things that go into it, and making sure that we have standard operating procedures in place. Because you put something new in place, maybe some of that proactive thinking is are people going to, what type of training is going to be needed, what type of standards need to be put in place so there's no variability. Next slide, Robert. Operate is a huge one, and another big risk to the business. Go to the next slide. The MCP Consulting, they did a study, said 40 to 50% of equipment breakdowns are caused by poor operating practices. So, no matter what your business is how we do business and how we do it in a repeatable fashion is significant. Are we following those standard operating procedures? Is there a culture of asset ownership, or do people, operate the equipment or the asset, or take care of it or not take care of it, like let's say a rental car, right? No ditch too deep, no curb too high. Any laughter there in the room? If you've ever been in a rental car, you don't quite care as much about it as you do your own. In the manufacturing world, we need to share metrics and so on, so that we have some ownership. So we're not into a I operate, you fix environment, because that puts us at risk. Next slide, Robert. Okay, maintenance. All right, go to the next slide, Robert. In order to reduce the risk of how we're maintaining our assets, we need to develop asset maintenance strategies that are based on failure modes. I guess maybe another quick example is that we had done some work for Google in New York City. They have a huge building the size of a city block that I forget how many stories it is. It's not a huge, tall building, 12 floors, I think. And what the way they addressed the risk, because they knew they had risk, they were having a lot of issues with the building, is that they brought us in to help them put asset management strategies in place based on how things were failing. And that's an FMEA, failure modes effects analysis. And it starts off, I won't go into great detail, but determining what's the function of it, how might it fail, calculating the risk of that failure, and then putting actions in place to mitigate that failure so it doesn't happen. So that's the maintenance side of this that gets a little nerdy in terms of how we can use some science in order to prevent those failures and risks to the business. Next slide, Robert.
Hey, Randy, a couple questions have popped up. One was around, as you're walking us through these principles of best practices, is how can agile principles be applied to this? How do you see those things working together? Do you see them working together?
Oh, I do. I'm personally not an agile expert, but I think organizations that are big into agile are it's gonna sync with this type of thinking absolutely perfectly. To me, the bottom line is all of this is about being proactive instead of reactive. I hope that answers your question somewhat. But
yeah, absolutely. Next question was around when you're doing this process, when you're in the analysis phase, I think is where this would be appropriate, is of identifying systems to prevent and recover, to deal with these threats. When you're trying to identify these threats, have you ever used or seen anybody use a pest analysis that it's political, economic, social, technological? It's a framework. Have you used that framework or any other frameworks?
Yes, we have actually. We've used that framework at Lifecycle Engineering in the past. It's excellent. I mean, I think it's similar. There's a lot of tools out there, and I think I would tell you that whatever tool, or methodology you're most comfortable with, as long as it is looking at systematically what are the risks to the business, like PEST as an example does, I think that's fine. It's excellent. And combining that with some of those standards that are available out there for some guidance around business continuity plans, is just go together quite well. I'm not going to say one or the other is better than the other. So.
And last question, just because of time, I want to give you 3 to 5 minutes to close, is what about frequency of planning? When doing business continuity or this, you mentioned critical assets, is there a best practices and frequency of this planning or this analysis?
I don't think there's a clear answer on that. I think somewhere in one of the standards, it talks about at least annually looking at or looking back and reviewing your plans. I think some of it's driven by the environment. Like COVID-19 as an example, it's changing so rapidly as we go through this that that might require some more frequent review. But no, I think it's like a lot of other things, is that if you can review the plans you have in place at least on an annual basis, you're probably okay.
Cool. Randy, I'm going to yield it back to you. You got 2 minutes to close.
Oh, okay. We're just about done. This slide I love because it's what we call the Swiss cheese effect, and what it boils down to is that if I have in those areas of design, buy, store, install, operate, and maintain, if multiple things start to happen in any one of those and they align, then really, really bad things can happen. So that's why it's important to look at many aspects of the business and to try to prevent these problems, these issues, these risks from aligning, right? It's one thing to say, hey, on my automobile is a good analogy. Hey, I've got a problem with a tire, or I've got, so I don't do anything right away. And all of a sudden, boom, now I have a problem with the brakes. And now I have a problem with something electrical. And suddenly I have multiple issues that I have to deal with. So I'm at greater and greater risk. Next slide, Robert. So how to develop a risk-based continuity plan. We've talked about the risk, get them identified, use the standards that are available, use the tools that you're comfortable with to help do that work. Like I mentioned earlier, create a cross-functional business steering committee and a cross-functional working group that work part-time on developing a plan to address the risk. Consider an outside entity to assess your plan. If you don't have experts within your organization, get some help. It's that important. Educate and train the organization as needed. test the plan frequently? And that was a great question, Robert, as to how frequently. And I think it's like I say, I think the environment dictates it a bit, but and conduct after action reviews, right? So, you know, what did we learn from COVID-19, or what did we learn from the hurricane, or what did we learn? And so the standards go much deeper into how to go about doing it if you've not done one, but I won't spend any more time on it than that. And I think, Robert, next slide is
perfect timing, Randy.
Pardon?
Wow, perfect timing. That was awesome. I'll wrap us up. We have a bunch of other questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the questions. I'm going to send out Randy's contact information. I'm going to send Beth's contact information up so people can follow up. There's also a great article on business continuity that I'll share with the group. What I pulled some notes here to close is I think scenario planning is more than just financial. We do a ton of financial scenario planning. Well, there is scenario planning for the rest of the organization, and that's business continuity. And it's the what if, plan for the what if. And then you could have an action plan, like a break glass in case of emergency action plan when something bad happens, right, Randy? It seemed like every 5 years something absolutely horrible and unmentionable happens. Thanks for depressing us this morning. But it does. Life happens, and COVID-19 is not the last thing. It's the first thing. It's the most recent thing. And then the importance of IDing critical assets, no matter what your business is. So awesome job, Randy. And I think we learned we're not alone. Your suppliers are not alone. If you need help, call Randy, call Beth, and the folks at Lifecycle Engineering. Great job.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, everyone.
Randy, you guys have a great day, and I will see you at a future breakfast someday. Bye, everyone.